This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, and I'm back for my penultimate review of the subclasses from Matt Mercer's book, Tal'Dorei Reborn. This time, it's the first time published Circle of Blight Druid. Here we get a warped and twisted druid. Not necessarily evil, but unwell. The druid's land has become poisoned, and that's affected the druid. Well, we've got lots of flavor here, but is the subclass good? And do you want it at your table? Let's see. The Blight Druid starts at 2nd level with a pair of features. However, it is not granting circle spells as Wildfire and Spores did. That means the features need to be top-notch. The first feature is Defile Ground. You create a 10-foot radius area of difficult terrain that isn't difficult for your allies, which also has the rider of adding d4 damage to the damage any creature takes while it is in that area, which oddly includes your allies. This feels less like a feature and more like a spell, and I'm not fond of features that act like spells. And this is really like a spell for the druid, because he's got control spells that create difficult terrain. Entangle is a 1st level spell that creates an area of difficult terrain, but it has the rider that creatures may be restrained. For control, that's better. Spike Growth is a 2nd level spell that creates difficult terrain in a 20-foot area, much bigger, that also does 2d4 damage for each 5 feet that a creature travels. This is much, much better than this feature, both in control and damage. So this feature is roughly equal to a 1st level spell, which is kinda skimpy for a feature. Doesn't require concentration, so that's good, nor a spell slot, and it refreshes on a rest. It does scale at higher level, but it doesn't scale well. The larger area helps, but that's 10th level, when I had that large an area with a spell at 3rd level, and the damage scaling adds roughly 1 point at 10th and another 1 at 14th, which is hardly worth the ink used to write it down. Luckily, it takes a bonus action to activate, and since it is a feature, you can use a leveled spell on the same turn. So by 3rd level, I wouldn't think of this as the main thing I was doing on my turn, but as a nice little useful control add-on to the real spell I was casting. The second feature is Blighted Shape. This makes the druid begin to look corrupted, granting proficiency in intimidation. Plus, it alters your wild shape, granting you a +2 to AC and dark vision while in wild shape. Okay, this feels much more like a feature, something that alters how a base class feature works, and has some nice flavor. It's not very good, however. You've no other charisma skills, so no reason to have put any points into charisma, so you're not actually going to be very intimidating. And you aren't a moon druid, so you don't have the combat shape, meaning you're not using wild shape in combat except when you're about to die as a way of getting some hit points. You're turning into rats and lizards, not bears. So a +2 to AC for a shape that isn't going into combat won't do much. And if you want dark vision in wild shape, you could have chosen a creature with dark vision to change into. So not strong or all that useful, but I like it. Hey, become a camel with dark vision. I call this a ribbon feature, and as a ribbon, it's what I want. The two features combined make for a weak level 2, probably the weakest of all druid subclasses. But it isn't terrible. Druid subclasses tend not to be disasters, so it's okay. At 6th level, the Blight Druid gets Call of the Shadow Seeds, which is a pet feature, which is odd for the druid who can summon all the pets he wants. But Wildfire Druid was a pet subclass, and it works. Here, your pet is an angry stick, and you can only call it when someone takes damage within your defiled ground. Again, note, it doesn't have to be an enemy who's hurt. You can do this proficiency bonus times per day, but only when the defiled ground is up, which is a once per rest feature. So, well, there's some awkward timing there. The stick doesn't do a lot of damage, but after the reaction used to summon it, there's no reference to needing any kind of action to control it. It just obeys your verbal commands. So anything it does now is free. It doesn't need to be impressive if it isn't taking up any resources. Its stats are okay, though its hit points being twice your level means it's going to die as soon as it is hit. But if it used up an enemy's turn to do so, that's fine. This isn't very good, but that cost of 1 reaction is low. At 10th level, you get Foul Conjuration, which is a buff of sorts to your summonings. This subclass is all over the place, but this is where it gets good. It's also fun and a little nasty. It's going to get harder to think of the Blight Druid as the good guy after this. So, all your summoned beasts, fae, and plants are now affected by corruption, and that includes your pet stick, giving them immunity to necrotic and poison damage and the poison condition, which probably isn't a big deal, but it might come up. But then it also turns them into into Walking C4. When any of your creatures die, they explode. Or you can set one off yourself with an action. Nothing like blowing up your friends. The amount of damage they do to those around them is based on their CR rating. So when you get this, you have 5th level spell slots that you can use to upcast the Conjure Animals spell. So you can call 16 1/4 CR creatures. Let's make that 16 Velociraptors. They're tiny, so we can pack them in 4 to a square around our victim, and they only have 10 HP, so easy to blow them up with any reasonable area of effect damage spell, at which point they do 16d4 damage, and that's after they did their own bite attacks. That's gonna hurt. Plus, it's funny. It won't work out all the time that well, but it will sometimes. Hey, choose draft horses to affect more squares, since those are large creatures. There's lots of possibilities. This is gonna make those low-level conjure spells good for quite a few more levels. So suddenly, this is a summoner subclass. I like it, but wish it had started with that theme and kept with it. It's kinda late to change how we play the character, but this is a good feature. The final feature comes on at 14th level, and it is Incarnation of Corruption. This is a constant buff to the druid, granting necrotic resistance and more importantly, a +2 to AC. And you can also use your bonus action while in your defiled ground to gain 5 and later 6 temp hit points, which is only worthwhile if you can't think of anything better to do with your bonus action. That's not that many temp hit points for this level. The AC boost is welcome, the rest is fine. So we ended up back at the defiled ground, though this time for defense and away from the pet and summoning. The theme of corruption runs strong in the subclass, but there's no design theme. The Blight Druid should have been mostly about control and damage, or mostly about a pet, or mostly about summoning. I like variety, but some focus would have made this a much more effective class. Drop the defiled ground and pet features, and add in some more blight-themed buffs to the druid itself and its summoned creatures, and you've got a playstyle. Well, the Blight Druid will be a reasonably effective generalist, not one of the better subclasses, but perfectly playable for someone who likes the toxic feel. It should be fun to play, and it is not overpowered, so sure, I'd recommend allowing it in your game, provided you don't mind dealing with an excessive number of conjured creatures. And that's the Blight Druid. I have one more subclass in Tal'Dorei Reborn to review. Hopefully you'll join me when I do. That's it for now. I'd like to say I've picked up some new sin, but I still can't sleep, so I'm sticking with sloth.